So next week we're going to take a look at a person. The title of the teaching next week is called I Want to Be Like Her. Because there's a her you need to get to know, and I'm going to talk about that next week. This week, though, I want to talk about the location where she lived and talk about an experience that Paul and Silas and the Apostle Luke had while they were there. Today's title is Just Another Day for a Jesus Follower. And we jump right in, and I'm going to be teaching you out of Acts chapter 16, starting in verse 16. And actually, we don't have any PowerPoint stuff out here. And if you have your Bible, you can turn to it. That's cool. But sometimes there's a way we learn differently when we just listen. And actually, the people who started this whole tradition of Jesus following, most of them couldn't read anyway. And most of them learned it by hearing. And they had a different experience of it just because they heard it. So it might be good for you just to hear the story this morning. So here we go. We're in Acts chapter 16. Let me give you some locations to think about so you kind of know where we are. Last week I talked about a city called Corinth. And what I told you about that city was it was a fairly young city. It was only 100 years old. It had some history behind it. But it was leveled by the Roman Empire and then rebuilt because it was an exceptional trade point. Corinth sits on an isthmus. Everybody say isthmus. Because it's fun to say. And it was an important trade route because, get my notes so I know what I'm talking about today. Important trade route because if you wanted to get goods from ancient Greece to ancient Rome, the best way to do that, that one's not my problem. But I will put a mic on that to protect it. If you wanted to get from ancient Greece to ancient Rome, you had two ways to go. You could sail a ship through some very dangerous waters, or you could bring your ship into a bay very close to the Isthmus of Corinth, which wasn't that far from Athens. And then you could take the Isthmus across to another bay, load up another ship, and head on to Rome. It was a much safer journey, so that's where most of it went. And Corinth, like I said last week, was kind of an ancient Las Vegas. It was a city with no soul. Had everything going on in it, all kinds of activity, a lot that wasn't very good, and Paul just dove into it. And he stayed there for 18 months. It was one of the longest tenure places he went to start a ministry. And amazing things happened there. They weren't a terribly divided church, but they had their problems they had to work through about what it meant to be Jesus followers in a city like Las Vegas. So think about that. Well, now we're talking about a different environment altogether. We're talking about what they would have called it Philippi. If you ever go over to ancient Greece and ask about Philippi, they'll look at you funny. But if you say, well, where's Philippi? Then you're pronouncing it right, so they'll kind of have an idea. This was on a fertile plain, north of Corinth, maybe about 100 miles or so. And because it was on a fertile plain, it was an agricultural city. So you had probably a lot of cotton that was grown up there and other kinds of grains. And they happened to grow grapes up there. Have any of you folks ever seen a vineyard? Right, you can relate to it then, right? That's kind of the picture of what we have here. It wasn't a large town. It was about 10,000 people strong at that time. And it sat right on what was called the Via Egnatia. The Via Egnatia was another commerce pipeline that connected northern Mesopotamia and also southern Asia Minor, that region, to Rome and all parts in between. So it was a major part for commerce, and that's where the story takes place today. Agricultural area. Next week I'm going to tell you about a key player in the early church. Her name is Lydia. Can't wait for you to hear that one. She's incredible. But today I want to talk to you about something that happened in the day of the life of Jesus followers in ancient Philippi. So one day as we were going to the place of prayer, this is Paul and Silas and Luke. Luke, the author of Luke, and who also authored this book called Acts, which is why he now says we were going, because he's a part of it. As we were going to a place of prayer down by the river, we met a demon-possessed slave girl. Now, demon possession back then, when we look at it from our vantage point, it could be exactly like it says, some kind of weird spiritual thing going on with this person. It could also have meant mental illness on some levels, or some other kind of brain chemical sort of thing happening to them. So, just like when they would talk about leprosy back in that day, sometimes they really meant leprosy, and sometimes they used one word, leprosy, to describe any number of skin issues in that day for the way they did laws and stuff. So anyway, this girl had something weird going on with her. She was a fortune teller who earned a lot of money for her masters. She followed Paul and the rest of us shouting, These men are servants of the Most High God, and they have come to tell you how to be saved. So everybody, repeat after me. These men are servants of the Most High God. And they have come to tell you how to be saved. So this went on day after day until Paul got so exasperated, that's weird, that he turned and said to the demon within her, I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And instantly it left her. Now, why in the world would Paul be so upset about this? I mean, she's not speaking a lie. She's telling the truth. He was there. He was coming from the power of the Most High God to tell people how to be saved, how to find God, how to be made whole, restored. So what's the problem? So I want you to change it a little bit. This time, instead of saying it just like you did it, the repeat after me, these men are servants of the Most High God. Have any of you ever seen SpongeBob before? Raise your hand if you can admit it here. It's a safe place. All right. SpongeBob has kind of a nasally high voice. So what I'd like you to do is plug your nose like this. Come on. I see you out there. I want you to talk as high as you can like this. Everybody got that? All right. Now repeat after me in this high nasally voice. These men are servants of the Most High God. And they have come to tell you how to be saved. All right. Now imagine that is your introduction every day as you're going down to the river. And as you're on your way, you have SpongeBob bouncing along. These men are servants of the Most High God. You know, it's no longer this nice luxury if somebody knows who you are. Now it's annoying. And if you had any hopes of building up what you were about and what you wanted to say, that was shot. And if anybody was laughing at what this girl was saying, now it's going to be hard to take you seriously when you have something really important to talk about. So that's why Paul was not thrilled with this thing, and why he wanted to finally do something about it. And finally, when the pressure was enough, he did. And he called out, and with the power of Jesus, this happened. And you can imagine for Paul, once he did this, he's thinking to himself, whew, I'm sure glad that worked, because I don't want to hear SpongeBob anymore announcing it like that. And he's probably thinking to himself, man, I just did this woman a favor. Now, she is no longer wrapped up in whatever this thing is. She is free from this. And so you can just kind of look at Paul's face. Probably the girl's face is looking pretty relieved. And you can think, you know, just look in Paul's head, he's thinking, well, you're welcome. I just did that for you. Or God did it for you, but you're welcome. And feeling pretty good about it. But then the scene changes almost immediately. The slave girl's master's hopes of wealth were now shattered because they'd make money off of her fortune telling. So they grabbed Paul and Silas and dragged them before the authorities at the marketplace. That's where you would drag them to be held for trial. The whole city is in an uproar because of these Jews, they shouted to the city officials. They are teaching customs that are illegal for us Romans to practice. So a little Trivial Pursuit question for you. Are they correct? Was what Paul and Silas teaching about Jesus and about God, were they breaking the law? Were they teaching something that was illegal for Roman people to practice? Yes. Well done, Curtis. That's right. The emperor was God and wanted to be treated as such, wanted to be bowed down and worshipped. Now, there were other temples and stuff for other little gods and stuff, but to say that there was a God, and to say that the highest God was not Caesar, that would get you in big, big trouble. And that's what these guys were bringing these guys out to say. And so a mob quickly formed against Paul and Silas, and the city officials ordered them stripped and beaten with wooden rods. They were caned, if you've ever heard that expression. They were severely beaten, and then they were thrown into prison. The jailer was ordered to make sure they didn't escape. So the jailer put them into the inner dungeon and clamped their feet in the stocks. So it's no fun to be incarcerated. I've never been incarcerated, but people that I know that have been incarcerated will let you know it's not a good experience. And in the United States, it's a better experience to be incarcerated than a lot of other parts of the world. It's going to be reasonably clean. You're going to have reasonably safe food. It's relatively safe. I mean, you're fairly well protected. You're even given clothes, and you get to bathe every couple of days. You know, it's somewhat tolerable. Not great, nobody wants it, nobody looks forward to it, but it's tolerable. I don't want you to think about that. I want you to think of Pirates of the Caribbean. I want you to think about the nastiest, most vile pit you can imagine that is utterly dark, that has human excrement all over the place, as well as rotting food, maybe a corpse in the corner, not quite sure. Utter filth. That's what I want you to think about. That's what you're thrown into. And then I want you to think about how you would feel not only being thrown in there, but thrown in there after having been severely beaten. So all you want to do is somehow curl up into a ball and be comfortable, just to survive through the night. You are in deep pain. Every inch of your body hurts. But you can't get too comfortable, because now you have shackles around your ankles, and you're in filth, and you don't really want to lay down. It's horrible. This is what Paul and Silas were experiencing. How would you like that, by the way? Yeah, awful. So the jailer makes sure that they're not escaping. And by the way, let's just call it what it is. These slave masters, they weren't theologically pious people, right? I mean, their real issue here wasn't that some doctrine was being violated for the Roman Empire. You kind of get that? They were ticked off because they were losing their money. It's funny how things that affect us where we live and breathe, that's what calls us to action. We can say some mildly theologically divergent things, even as a church, and some of those things you're like, yeah, no big deal. But when it starts to hit you where you live and breathe, when it starts to impact your wallet or your lifestyle, now you're paying attention. And how often is that the way it works with us? These guys didn't give a rip about Paul and Silas and Luke and what they had to preach on the river to anybody who would buy it. They did not care. Say whatever you want. But now that it affected them personally and their money, now they're upset. And so I just want to ask you, because we live in a country where you can be quite complacent as a Christian. You're no real threat of being abused by just being a Christian person. How is your relationship with God right now? Compared to the before and after story, just compare yourself to the slave master, who, probably thought of himself as a spiritual person, but now he's taking it very seriously. What's going on in your life to get your attention? What needs to happen in your life to get your attention? That your faith is not just this casual thing that you sort of deal with. It gets you through a little bit, but it's not really impacting your life. What if God really asked you to put it to the test? What if something came in from the outside that was going to affect your pocketbook or affect the way you lived your life? How differently might you treat your faith at that point? What does it take for God to break through to us? That's the question I'm trying to get at. Okay, so we have Paul and Silas there in this horrible pit of a place. And around midnight, Paul and Silas, does the Bible say were moaning and groaning in utter agony? No, it doesn't say that they were moaning and groaning in utter agony. It says around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening. Holy cow. This is awesome. Well, what does this tell us about Paul and Silas? In utter agony, and instead of moaning and groaning and just wallowing in their pain and misery, they're praying and singing hymns to God. You know why they're doing that? Any ideas why they would do that at that point? Curtis?
They would be happy with the suffering for God.
They'll get there. Yeah, that's right. That's part of it. They counted it as a privilege to suffer for the name of Jesus. Yep. There's another real practical reason why they were singing hymns and praise to God and praying. Unshakable faith. Yep, they had unshakable faith. And the super practical reason is it worked. It worked. When I was in college. You know, if you know my story much, I've told it a little bit. In my earlier life, I came to a very adult relationship with God in high school, and then that kind of fell apart over the years for lack of support. And then it really got turbocharged in college. And what helped turbocharge it in college is the price was high enough for me to pay attention to it. And so I was heartbroken. I had my heart broken, and I was in absolute agony. I was about 20 years old or so. I think I was 20. And I remember laying there at night and just shattered and not doing well at all. And then I started to listen to some music. This is when Hillsong, if you're familiar with that, is a worship artist band out of Australia. That was really when they started to come on the scene. There were some other artists that were doing similar stuff. And I found great comfort in these songs of worship. And I found myself humming along and singing along. And something really weird happened. All of my disdain, all of my being distraught, all of my worry was replaced by peace. It's the oddest thing. You know, Paul writes about this to the Philippian church later on. This is going to be in your notes for the week to look at. But he ends up writing this as he's in prison in Rome. He's writing a letter to the church in Philippi, and he says this to them: don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. Just out of curiosity, have any of you ever experienced this phenomenon where you're just a total wreck, and then, whatever reason, but somehow you turn around, you start praying, and you experience this peace without understanding? Anybody? Yeah, extraordinary. It's real. And I think, at least from my vantage point, what's happening there is at that moment, you have an utter moment of clarity where you realize that everything else that you might put your hopes in and put your life in, really at the end of the day is dust. So all my stuff, the car I drive, the house I live in, my toys, all that stuff at the end of the day is dust. It really doesn't matter, and it really does not give me life. And even the things that I love, my family, my wife, my kids, the San Francisco Giants, even those things, at the end of the day are dust. And I think those most painful moments in our lives wake us up that our ground of being, a great theologian called Paul Tillich came up with that idea, that God is our ground of being. That's where our life resides in, where our life is sourced from. And it's like in those moments of utter pain, it's like that's when we really get it. And the only thing that works at those moments is when we tie into that. And so these prayers, this meditation, this worshiping to God of God, you're all I've got. I remember there was this song I used to sing, God is our refuge of strength, our refuge and strength, and I would sing that to sleep. There's another one, a song of lament in the Psalms that I would sing, and it grounds you and gets you through. And so if you're in that spot where you're really facing it, listen to Paul and Silas. This is no trivial, I'm going to gloss over the pain. This is not a denial of pain that they're going through. They're not pretending to try to get through this with a worship service. This is their heart cry. This is who they are. And they're doing it because it works, because God meets us there. So it gets weirder. This is just a one weird day for Paul and Silas and Luke. As they're singing this, and by the way, everybody's paying attention to what they're singing because they're probably the only ones that are singing and praying. This is odd. Lots of moaning and groaning perhaps, but not much singing. And so they have the attention of everybody else in the jail house. And they know that this is extraordinary. Well, suddenly, after midnight sometime, there was a massive earthquake. And you and I can relate to massive earthquakes. And the prison was shaken to its foundations. All the doors immediately flew open, and the chains of every prisoner fell off. The jailer woke up to see the prison doors wide open. He assumed the prisoners had escaped, so he drew his sword to kill himself. The reason he's drawing his sword to kill himself is because if those prisoners escape, it's on him. And he will be killed for their escape. And he does not want to be killed by the Roman government. He would rather commit suicide. This guy's absolutely hopeless. He's like, I'm not going to let them touch me. I'm going to take care of business myself. And so he draws a sword to kill himself. But Paul shouted at him at that moment, stop. Don't kill yourself. We're all here. Now at this point, we got to just imagine this for a moment, about what this says about Paul and Silas. First of all, they didn't leave. They had the opportunity to escape, and they didn't. Why didn't Paul and Silas just escape? Why didn't they just leave? Anybody have any ideas? If it were you, would you just go for it? Let's make a run for it. Right? I mean, that makes sense. Why not just cut and go? Well, there's a good reason why they didn't leave right away. There were good answers. Actually, the early service blew you guys out of the water. They had all kinds of ideas. So shame on you. The early service wins today. But the early service ideas, they skirted around with some very good ideas, which certainly manifest themselves here in a moment, where they had compassion for other people, knew that they had a higher calling, and needed to be present in that moment. That's true. We'll see that in a second. But there's another reason why Paul and Silas didn't cut. And that's because they were men of integrity. And they knew what was coming. They had a plan in mind that was going to unfold the next morning. But they knew that if they escaped prison, if they left, they now had a new note on their criminal record. And they didn't want a new note on their criminal record. They wanted to stay above reproach. So these men of integrity decided to stick it out in that moment and see what would happen. Now, Paul knows he's got something to play the next day. But I think it's extraordinary that at that moment, and even if they didn't escape, I mean, the jailer and the other guards that are around there, they're probably all thinking suicide, right? Because that's the easy way out. And they're thinking, I'd rather just take care of business. And frankly, if you'd just been beaten by these guys and made fun of and treated very harshly, I think it would be very easy to keep your mouth shut, wouldn't it? You're like, well, hey man, maybe this is God taking care of business. God was paying attention to how much pain you put me through, and here you go. Karma's well, anyway, it was, this is going to be rough. Maybe that's what he was thinking. So it says a little bit more about Paul and Silas's character. That he calls out. He knows what the jailer is thinking, and he says, stop. I know you're thinking about letting it all go. Don't. Which, I need to pause, because there could be some of you here today that are feeling like that jailer. Really. Or maybe things have just mounted up in your life, and you feel hopeless. And you feel like you can't go on, and you really are thinking just like that jailer, I'm going to take care of business myself. And if that's what you're thinking, I want to tell you, stop. I know you feel alone. I know you feel hopeless, but you are not alone, and you are not hopeless. I'm here to help you. Dar's here to help you. All the people around you will help you. On my blog, which you can check out later today, it releases at noon, I think. You know, if you or somebody you know is dealing with that, tell them to call 911, or there's a National Suicide Prevention Hotline there. Suicide's a real issue. We saw it right here because of absolute pain and hopelessness in this jailer. And if you know somebody who needs to hear that, kick them that number and be the one, be the Paul to that person. And if you're the jailer today, I just hope you'll breathe deep, and hope you'll trust me. Hope you'll trust the people who just raised their hands, that God really does show up when we need it the most. So anyway, the story continues. Paul shouts out, don't kill yourself, there's hope for you. And the jailer called for lights, because he couldn't see anything. They called for lights, which for them meant a torch. And they ran to the dungeon and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and asked, Sirs, what must I do to be saved? What a fascinating question that he would ask. He knew that there was more going on with Paul and Silas than just a couple of good guys. He'd been listening to the worship service as well. Saved for him wasn't just about getting to heaven. Saved was a whole life equation. Salvation is a whole life proposition. This is what God wants to do with us. Yes, a future hope for something after this life is absolutely there. And we find it with great confidence through the person of Jesus. But don't miss it. Salvation is now. It's about your life now and going forward. And this guy, I think, was understanding that. So he asked, what do I got to do to be saved, made whole? How's this thing work? And they replied, believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, along with everyone in your household. And they shared the word of the Lord with him and with all who lived in his household. Even at that hour of the night, the jailer cared for them and washed their wounds. The jailer's doing this for them. This is crazy. Then he and everyone in his household were immediately baptized. That's the sign of, okay, we're in this thing. He brought them into his house and set a meal before them. And he and his entire household rejoiced because they all believed in God. This is amazing stuff. And we have a lot to learn about what it means to share our faith from Paul and Silas in this environment. Jeff Jones, who usually attends our early service, many of you know him, he's been around here for some years now. He asked me a question before service, knowing that this was coming up. What does it mean when Paul says, believe in Jesus Christ and you and your whole household will be saved? Does that mean, is it as simple as, okay, well, I say yes to Jesus and now I'm saved, so you know, immediately my whole household is in? Is that how it works? That's not how it works. Remember, if salvation is a whole life kind of a thing, then think about it this way. Let's say I didn't grow up with any kind of church understanding at all, which is very different because I grew up with lots of it, in spades, in fact. But let's say I knew nothing about it. And I got married, having my kids, we know nothing about faith, nothing about spirituality. We're probably one of those, I'm not a part of any religion, but I believe there's something out there bigger than me. So I might call myself spiritual, but that's about it. I don't really want a whole lot to do with religion. I don't really understand any of it. And then I meet somebody, like Harlan Smetzer. And Harlan Smetzer takes me out to play some golf or buy lunch or whatever. And over time, we build a relationship, and I see that this Jesus thing is working pretty well for Harlan, mainly because Linda Smetzer's been working on it for all these years. Anyway, so I'm talking to Harlan, and finally decide, all right, Harlan, I'm in. I'm on board. Let's do this thing. And he says, okay, and he walks me through this thing, teaches me to pray, helps me understand some basic things about what it means to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. I'm taking it seriously. I don't haphazardly jump into this. This is no emotional decision. I'm seeing an opportunity for a different kind of life. And so I start walking in that different kind of life. It means that I'm a changed person when I go home to my household. Whereas before, I might have been more or less about me in my household. And maybe I wore the pants of the family. Maybe I was chauvinistic toward my family and treated my wife, like less than me. Or I was the boss. I made sure she knew it. Maybe I was a little bit more authoritarian with my kids and wanted to keep them under my thumb because it's the only way I could control them. But now understanding the way of Jesus and talking to Harlan about it, I realize, Jesus was a servant. And as Harlan introduces me to Ephesians chapter 5, and I understand that there's this submission thing that's supposed to happen that was absolutely countercultural and it goes against our way of even thinking. And so this counterintuitive way of now I'm supposed to serve my wife as Christ served the church. Everything changes for me. And now it's not about feeling like the big boss, but now it's like I'm chief janitor. Now I'm like the chief server in the household. And now it's not telling my kids what to do, it's serving my kids toward their best, serving my wife toward her best. And things change in my household. Whereas the household before may have been intact, but not very whole, Jesus works his way in through me. And slowly and surely, my household becomes more whole, more saved. And God is certainly much more able to do a work there. I think that's the genius of it. And I think that's our hope. I think that's how it's supposed to work. So thank you, Harlan, for introducing me to Jesus so many years ago. It's really paying off. And thank you, Linda, for hounding him to do that. So I think we got a model here. I think the model for how it's supposed to go is this. Now, you're doing the best you can to follow Jesus. And I have a hunch that if you're doing it pretty well, you're going to be marked by hope and peace and love and joy and peace and patience and kindness, all the fruits of the Spirit. These are things that are just naturally going to be who you are. It means that people are going to look at you and they're not going to say, there's another one of those judgmental Christians. They're going to look at you and say, that's different. Now, I don't know what faith he is, but he sure looks a lot like Jesus, or she looks a lot like Jesus. It's peaceful. It's loving. It's serving. This is the way of Jesus. And I think it's winsome. And I think when we're that type of people, I think people want to know more about that. Because we live in a world where there's all kinds of reasons to have fear. And if we walk into that world with peace, that's different. When I was in college, after that experience I talked to you about, that fall I went back to college, and I was in charge of the student ministries. And I was kind of a renegade, hard to imagine. And we did a lot of fun stuff. And I was still me, just having a good time, but I was walking with Jesus. So things were different in my life because I was trying to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. And I've never been one of the kind of confrontational evangelist guys. I think tracts are an offense to most people, and I don't think they really capture what God's about. I think that whole idea is pretty awful for the most part. And I think we see in Jesus, he's highly relational and high touch and values that a lot. And so that's kind of how I was. It was more of, I'm going to be friends with everybody, and I'm going to have a great time, and I'm going to do my best to follow Jesus in that way and be Jesus to people as best as I can. But I'm not going to do that overt thing, because I saw other people do it, and it just left a bad taste in my mouth, and it was leaving a trail of people who weren't real happy in their wake. And so I thought, well, let's just try this. And one night, about 3 months into college, the college quarterback, university quarterback, knocks on my door like 1 a.m. or something. And it's Bobby. And Bobby lived on my hall, and we were friends. We'd horse around together and stuff. And he knocked on the door, and he asked if we could talk. And I said, yeah, sure. And I thought we were just going to shoot the breeze about whatever, but he wanted to ask about my faith. And he wanted to know, how's this thing work? And he grew up kind of nominally Catholic. I'm not a Catholic basher, but he just wasn't really that involved and wasn't really engaging it much, and it wasn't really doing much for him. And he could tell that the faith that I had was doing something for me, and he wanted to know, how do I do that kind of faith? Because it's working for you. I think that's how it's supposed to look, is we're walking with Jesus. People notice that because more and more Jesus is bleeding out of us, is coming out our pores. And people simply want to know. And it's not that we're so wonderful, it's that the one who's in us is so wonderful. And we're just lucky enough to say something about it. That's the picture here that we have of Paul. When they were singing songs in prison, I don't think they were thinking, okay, let's really make sure we nail this because we have an audience here and we don't want to offend any ears. I don't think that's it. I think they were singing because they couldn't help but to sing. And they were just calling out to God. It's who they were. And because their passion for singing out to God was necessary for them to survive, it got noticed. And when it got noticed, it raised questions, real questions, lowered defense questions. And that led to the opportunity for somebody to get to know Jesus. And a whole household was saved because of it. So now you have a whole household. The jailer was probably doing pretty well for himself. Whole household could mean servants and family. We're talking maybe 20, 30 people now are in the way of Jesus. It's pretty impressive. But the story doesn't end there. The next morning, the city officials sent the police to tell the jailer, let those men go. So the jailer told Paul, the city officials have said, you and Silas are free to go, leave in peace. And at this point, the jailer's got to be thinking to himself, I am so glad I did not kill myself, because these guys were going to be released in the morning. He would have killed himself for nothing. Suicide's like that, though. It's not where we want it to go. So naturally, you would think Paul and Silas would, pick themselves up and just take a hike. But that's not what happened. But Paul replied, they have publicly beaten us without a trial and put us in prison. And we are Roman citizens. Now they just got their attention. Roman citizens are expected to have due process. And they did not get their day in court. What happened to them was illegal. And Paul is pointing this out. So he says, now they want us to leave secretly? Certainly not. Let them come themselves to release us. When the police reported this, the city officials were alarmed to learn that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens. Now, if this happened in our day and age, do you think Jill Teckle, the mayor of Napa, do you think she would drop everything and walk across the lawn to go visit the inmates. Probably wouldn't happen. But that's what happened in Philippi. So they came to the jail and apologized to them. Then they brought them out and begged them to leave the city. When Paul and Silas left the prison, they returned to the home of Lydia, who you're going to hear about next week. There they met with the believers and encouraged them once more. Then they left town. Why in the world would the mayor of the city choose to go see these guys, apologize, and ask them politely to leave? Back in the Greek culture, shame and blame were a very strong power. And you didn't want anything to taint your level or your title. So for them to make a mistake on this level was very, very significant, and Paul knew it. We read this thing or hear this thing, and we think, man, why didn't Paul? This is like the second out that Paul has. Paul's making a big deal. It's like drawing attention to himself. I thought this is exactly opposite of what you would expect. You'd think Paul would just say, whew, all right, we're out, let's go. Now we're not illegal anymore. But that's not what he does. He raises the bar. He raises the attention. Do you know why Paul would raise the attention of what happened before he left town? Any ideas? Out of protection. He knows that he has a fledgling group of Jesus followers here. And he knows the rumor mill does not generally articulate facts well. Am I right about that? If they would have just left town and moved on, this group of Jesus followers, Lydia, who you'll hear about next week, and the jailer and his whole household, and whoever else they've gotten on board the way, they'd start meeting. And then the rumor mill would eventually get back to them like it generally does. And half-truths would be shared. Half-truths like, I can't believe you're going to that church. Don't you know what happened? Don't you know what they said? That guy was jailed. He was clearly wrong. The public officials threw him in jail and whipped him pretty bad. Something was up with them. They must not be with God at all. So I think you should just maybe consider another church. We know this kind of rhetoric happens back then because it happens today. And things are said in the rumor mill that are punishing to different churches in town, including ours. So Paul is wanting to make sure that doesn't happen. He knows he's on a journey. He knows he's going to leave. But to have a public figure come and say, we were wrong. We did this to them and it was illegal what we did. And we apologize for it. It says to the entire community that Paul and Silas were legit. And it legitimates and founds that new community so that they can grow without that public scrutiny and only be judged by the efficacy of Jesus himself. It's brilliant. And so we have that same opportunity in the way we live our lives. All of this story, I don't know why or what this story communicates to you. I don't know what part hits you the most. I don't know if the thing that hits you the most is that Paul and Silas were there doing it, and they realized that they were on a mission. Do you know that you're called, that you call yourself a Jesus follower? Do you know it's not just about you, but you've been deputized, that you have a command on your life? It's not an option. But when that opportunity comes for you to share your hope, you're called to do it, to help more people get it. And it doesn't have to be this offensive thing that is caricaturized, in certain places. It can be this beautiful, life-giving thing that we just saw in this passage. Maybe that's your take-home, is that there's a beautiful way to express things that are very good and very faithful, that really work. And maybe that's what you need to learn. Maybe for you, the thing for you to learn today is that when the chips are down and you feel terrible, maybe you just need to hear that you're not as alone as you thought you were. Maybe you need to hear that there's hope, even though it seems hopeless. Maybe what you need to learn from is Paul and Silas, who couldn't help but sing. Maybe you need to try that on for size. Maybe tonight when you go to sleep, instead of crying yourself to sleep, maybe tonight you lament to God. Maybe you call out to God as you fall asleep. You can still be angry, you can still be upset, you can still shake your fist at God, why is this happening? But it's different because you're directing it to somebody who can do something about it. Maybe tonight you start to have a song of worship in the background that communicates something powerful, or whatever. Maybe that's your solace, your balm. Maybe for you it's about keeping your head straight. When the earth is shaking around you and people are going nuts, you remain the one that's calm and centered. And because of it, lives are changed and saved. I don't know what God is doing with you in this text. This is just another day in the life of a Jesus follower. And if you're a Jesus follower, flavors of this are going to come your way all the time. Opportunities for us to learn more about God. Opportunities for us to change the world with God. We are uniquely positioned, by the way. I don't know if you know that. As Crosswalk Community Church, we have an edge. We have an opportunity to reach the people, the jailers of the world, who probably don't want a whole lot to do with religion, but they'd like to know a little bit more about God. We have the opportunity to do that in a very unique way here. And I'm asking you to consider you, Paul and Silas's. Are you on board with that? And together, if we follow this methodology, if we follow this way of life, just how many people do you think we can reach? How many people need to know there's hope, that there's more, that we can do something about, that there's beauty to be had, there's life to be had, there's hope to be had? You and I are called to that. I'm asking you to answer that invitation with a yes, because it's what we're called to do. So let's pray together and see if we can get to a yes. So first and foremost, God, if there are any of us who are in that pit, feels like hell to us, feels hopeless to us, there is a yes that you are asking us to consider, and that yes is, the question is there hope? Is there somebody out there who loves me? And the answer to that question is yes. And so if we're in that place of pain, I pray that we will say yes to you, and that we will allow you to soothe us, to give us peace where there is no peace. I pray that you will give us strength where we have no strength. As Isaiah says, you exchange beauty for ashes, strength for fear, gladness for mourning, peace for despair. May we say yes to that. And maybe today, God, maybe our yes is to look at Paul and Silas's life and recognize that we have an opportunity just by walking with you to make a difference in the world. That there are people who are going through it all around us all the time. And we have a solution. We have a way of being. We have a connection with you to be shared. So maybe today, your invitation is, hey, would you consider? Would you consider being a part of the solution here? And be a part of the hope that I want to bring to the world. This is God saying to you. So will your answer be yes? In beautiful, creative, wonderful ways that encourage instead of put down. Will we be the sweet fragrance of the people of God? Will you be that today? And maybe today we're jailer types or jailer household types that we've never really said yes to this Jesus thing, but today we're finally starting to put it together. And today we're like, I want some of that, I want that, and I'm in. And maybe today it is just as simple as you saying yes to God, just you and God, that you might experience this wholeness, this salvation thing more and more and more. That you would know you are held and held forever in the graceful arms of God. And that there is a life to be had here on this earth which is beautiful, meaningful, satisfying, and for everybody. Maybe that today is today you say yes to that. Take a moment in silent prayer. Pray as you need to pray. And I'll close this off in a moment. God, in a world and even in a country that is deeply divided and hostile in its division, polarized, where words of hatred are easy to come by, may we be a people of beauty. May we be a people of encouragement. May we be good news to people who are longing for good news. And because we are, may people find the source of our good news. And may they find themselves following in the footsteps of Jesus right along with us. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.